Welcome, everybody. Hey, it's AOPA's What's Up? We're really glad to have you here, coming live from AOPA headquarters. This month's episode is Ask an AOPA Medical Specialist. So we've got two amazing guests on here with us to help us do that. So we'll get to them in just a moment. But before we do that, let's handle some of our basic housekeeping just to make sure everyone knows how to work the controls. If you are on a PC, you're looking, and I'm kind of moving my mouse around up here, you're looking at that top part where it says attendee control panel, and your panel will look like the graphic over here on the right. So you'll see the little question mark in the comic bubble or whatever. So you're going to click on that, and then this little part should open up down here. Type in your question, and most importantly, click send. Click send. And by the way, one of the reasons you'll be noticing there, it says it too, later in the episode, not right now, later in the episode, we are going to be giving away a couple of AOPA hats, not right now, so please don't put it in right now for our standard fans. What you'd want to do is type in that question box when we say to do so, type in hat or something along those lines, and the first, whoever is probably going to be the first two that get in will get a hat. So be prepared for that. If you are on a tablet, what you are looking for is the little question mark right here. And then the same deal, you would type in your question here, or in the case of, if it was a time when we mentioned getting the prize, you would go ahead and type it in there, and then make sure you click that send button to do that. And just for purposes of all being fair and everything else, we do get a timestamp on each return to the second, so we know exactly who is first when those come in. So be looking for that a little later in the show. And let's keep moving on. My name, as always, is Chris Moser. I'm here at AOPA. I'm the Senior Director of Flight Training Education. I work to support CFIs, or instructors, and flight schools. So really glad to be here with you. And we are really happy to have here our two special guests. First off, Anita Fetzer. Anita, you're one of our Senior Medical Certification Specialists. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so let me say I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the invite. I have been with AOPA for about 6 years. I came to AOPA with more than 30 years working in the healthcare. I attend meetings and training seminars with AMEs, with the FAA, and of course we're your BasicMed gurus. We're always happy to take your phone calls anytime, we're available. Just reach out to us.
And thank you, Anita, so much for being here too. And we will have, and I know that Anita's got the phone number there, we will have that on every slide when we get into the content, and it is on your handout today. So for those of you that are familiar with the program, we've got the handout available for download, and it has that contact information there as well. So thanks so much again for Anita. And not to forget, so I look at least in my middle view right here, we've also got Cade Hale with us. Cade, I know that it says you're the Senior Manager of the Flying Club Initiative, but you've got some special qualifications to also be on the show this week, or this month.
Yeah, so you're probably wondering, why is a Flying Clubs guy talking about medical stuff? But when I first started AOPA, I was a medical certification specialist, much like Anita is. I then moved over to You Can Fly, where I'm now the Senior Manager of the Flying Clubs Initiative. Prior to AOPA, I was a critical care paramedic, and then a tactical paramedic on the City of Charleston Police Department SWAT team. So I do have a pretty extensive medical background as well. And I've been out of it for a little while, the medical side, but I still keep abreast of most of the FAA updates and things like that. So just happy to be here to answer all your questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being here with us, Cade, too. And I know it says, oh, you left, oh, there it is, the disgruntled Cowboys fan, for those in the audience that may be interested in that, take note. So very cool. Thanks for being here with us, both of you. And let's keep moving on. I'm also looking at the questions as they're coming in. So let's go. Hey, don't forget, Stephen. I know Stephen is always on here with us. And Stephen, why don't you say hello, Stephen?
Hello, Stephen.
Go ahead.
Coordinator with the Flight Training Initiative, so I work directly with Chris and adjacent here with Cade. Do a variety of project manager type stuff, so I get to work on our Flight Training Experience Awards each year, produce shows like this, and it's been a whole lot of fun. Happy to be here.
Awesome. And thanks for being here, Stephen. And Stephen will be the one later when we say the magic words. Stephen will be the one to determine who that winner is and let us know. So let's keep moving on, just juggling a few things here. And for those, our normal audience members too, Dan is not with us today. He just had a conflicting meeting, so he wasn't able to do it, but he should be back next month. So just stand by for Dan next month. We always know that he's got his fan group here in the audience. Now, That said, the part that Dan would normally talk about is what's up, know, learn, fly, and all of our other You Can Fly programs are funded by generous contributions to the AOPA Foundation. So if you would like to support, and we would love to have you support our programs, you can do that at aopafoundation.org. So check that out. Now, reminders today. Now, you'll notice there's something different on the slide this month. What happened was when we came up with the idea for this program doing the medical part, we didn't realize that there was a wings credit issue. There is a special process you would have to normally go through. I think it's the regional air surgeon is what they asked us to do. We had to run it by them. And so
right.
because of yeah, it was something like that. So because of that FAA requirement, unfortunately, we do not have wings credit for this program, only because of the fact that of the topic. We will have wings credit again next month, we anticipate, and we'll talk about that topic when we get to the end of the broadcast today. So no wings credit this month, but hopefully you're here for the great information that both Cade and Anita are going to provide you regarding medical. Now, this program is being recorded, and so you can check this out later on YouTube on the AOPA pilot video channel. So if you go to the YouTube, look up AOPA pilot video, and then go down looking at for the channels or playlists, I believe, you'd see there's one that says what's up, no, learn, fly, or no, fly, learn. I'm not sure if we reverse that or not. And you can also find that at webinars.aopa.org. So those are two places you can find those. Give us a few days. Stephen will get that all processed. It'll probably show up on that channel sometime early next week. It'll get uploaded. So, all right. Stephen, what happened today in aviation history? Or at least yesterday?
Shucks, I've got the wrong year on this. It was 1973, not 1933.
Hey, they were advanced.
But Florida State Senate votes to rename Cape Canaveral. I guess restore the name of Cape Canaveral to the island for the NASA establishment. It had been renamed Cape Candy shortly after the president's assassination for a short amount of time. As a compromise, though, then they restored the name of Cape Canaveral to the landmass. They called it the Kennedy Space Center, so that all parties were happy.
That's pretty cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, 1973. Sorry, folks.
Very cool. So 73. We'll just make mental note of that. And thanks, Stephen, for sharing that with us. Okay, let's talk about what is on the checklist today. And actually, before we get to the checklist, I think it's time for hats. Who would like a hat? Put it in the question thing right now. And the first two that respond will get a free hat while I continue talking. So we'll look for those coming in. So make sure you put that in your question box and hit that send button. Just let us know you'd like a hat. We've got two to give away right now. All right. So what is on our checklist today? As you can see, we have, and see they've already come in, so we're good, guys. We've got the two hats. The questions are going crazy with the hats, but we've got our first two. So Stephen, I'll let you handle that. So our checklist today, you can see we're going to cover as much as we can. We got an overwhelming response to asking you for questions ahead of time. And so we're going to do the best we can. So I'm going to now turn this over. You can see the wide variety of things that we'd like to talk about, and we'll do the best that we can to get also your questions in once we get to our Q&A section. So Anita, Cade, hey, BasicMed is a really popular one, and I know you guys hear about it. Can you tell us a little bit more about that program and then some of the questions that you guys get?
Yeah, so BasicMed was initiated, actually it was May 1st of 2017 was the first day, and basically it states it's a self-certification. Let me clarify that. It is not an FAA medical certificate, but under Part 61.53, that these airmen can self-certify under BasicMed. Now, there are some ins and outs of that. There are some disqualifying conditions for BasicMed, but I just want to make it clear that with the BasicMed, the same disqualifying conditions for an FAA medical do not necessarily apply to BasicMed. And one of the common misconceptions that we hear a lot is, I have a special issuance, can I go to BasicMed? And the simple answer is, most likely, yes, you can. So don't let that deter you. If you have questions about it, obviously contact us. We're the ones to ask about that. Another common question we get is, where do the forms go with your BasicMed? It's much more simple, hence the word basic medical, BasicMed. It is a form that's filled out between you and your doctor. You keep the form. It does not go to the FAA, it does not come to AOPA. Once you're done with that form, you do the online course and quiz, you print a certificate of completion. Again, nothing is getting sent to AOPA, FAA. The only thing that will be sent is an electronic notification to the FAA Airman registry that shows that you actually completed the steps. Deferrals. If your AME defers you in the office, that does not mean you're not eligible for basic med. Again, if you didn't have a basic med disqualifying condition, you very well can go to basic med while you're waiting for a deferral from the FAA awaiting their decision. Right now, those decisions can be anywhere from 5 months all the way up into 8, 9 months. So you want to make sure you understand that completely. All right. Any questions out there?
Oh yeah, lots of questions. Let me go back, and I know that I'm just going back to some of the earlier ones, and I'll take a look. By the way, one thing that Anita, would you tell us too, is talking to the medical team, is that part of our membership, AOPA membership?
Oh, absolutely. So if you are flying under basic med, you don't even require an AOPA membership, although we do appreciate it. We want to keep general aviation going. All levels of membership, you do not need to have the pilot protection services. All levels of membership can call the medical certification department. That's what we're here for.
Awesome. So hear that. So if you are an AOPA member, just your regular AOPA membership allows you to talk to our medical team. The upgrade only applies to if they wanted their medical records reviewed and they sent those in. Correct. That's where that pilot protection services part comes in.
Correct.
Okay. Let's see. I got some questions here. I'm not going to take that one just yet. I just want to. You already answered the part about going from third class or from third or second class to basic med. You kind of talked about that, or did you? You kind of addressed that a little bit, right? So
a little bit, yeah. So if you have an FAA medical currently, yes, you can go to basic med as long as you have not developed a disqualifying condition. Actually, I'm very glad you brought that up, because one of the key points I want to point out is the 10-year look-back rule that no longer applies. When Basic Med first came out, it said the airman must have had a valid FAA medical on or after July 15th of 2006. So the 2006 still applies, but obviously we're way beyond that 10-year look-back period, so you don't have to worry about that part. As long as your most recent FAA medical has not been revoked, denied, suspended, or withdrawn, as long as you have not developed a basic med disqualifying condition, and there's 3 categories of those, then you can go to basic med. There's nothing that says you cannot. What I do caution on those airmen that are in a HIMSS program, I would definitely say reach out to us before you make that transition, because there may be some ins and outs there. It may not quite be that easy to transition. 2 different regulations. Basic med, FAA medical, you can hold both of them simultaneously. There's nothing that says you can't. You can go back and forth between the 2 if you so choose. Some of the most common airmen that are using basic med are those that have extensive requirements to renew a special issuance. So for instance, if they have cardiac testing, where an AME cannot reissue in the office, what they'll do is they'll fly under basic med while the FAA is reviewing that paperwork. So this way they can keep flying while they are awaiting a new certificate from the FAA.
Very cool. There was one question I had, and then we'll move on to the next slide, because I know we want to keep going to hit as many as we can. But somebody said that they had 70 years old, had a 3 months with a small tremor in their hands, saw a neurologist who said it was serious, but it went away months later. Do they need, and they're on basic med, should they report that?
Well, on basic med, the point of the basic med, the CMEC, the Comprehensive Medical Exam Checklist, anytime you complete that, you need to be honest and truthful. You need to have an open conversation with your physician that is doing your basic med exam. And if they feel that it's something that maybe would inhibit your abilities, you need to give some precedence to that, because there may be something there. And then from that point, it is solely on the airman. 6153, you have to self-certify that you are not flying with a known medical deficiency.
Yeah, and specifically, and specifically since it was specifically mentioned as a neurologic condition with the tremor, the FAA's disqualifying condition verbiage for basic med for a neurological condition is that they cannot have a transient loss of nervous system functions without satisfactory medical explanation of the cause. So something like a stroke, for instance, that would be kind of on the more serious side. But it all comes down to that transient loss of nervous system functions without a satisfactory medical explanation of the cause. So it gets kind of complicated there on what would be disqualifying under basic med and what wouldn't be when it comes to a neurological condition, which is all the more reason why you should be picking up the phone and giving Anita and her team a call when it comes to specific questions like that.
Right. And I'm glad you pointed that out. With neurological, there are some cases, so you mentioned a stroke. If we know what the cause is, your doctor may sign off on you. They may say, yeah, you know what, this was a blockage in the carotid artery, this was not cardiac related, and you may be eligible. That's your doctor's decision, but you may still be eligible. Before we move to the next slide, there was one more questioning here, was about medications. BasicMed does not have a medication database. There is not a database that says a medication is or is not allowed. However, it all goes back to that 6153. Are you flying with a known medical deficiency? Do you have a condition, that this medication may exacerbate and make you unsafe to be in the air? So those types of questions, by all means, you can call us, of course, but there is no medication database for BasicMed.
All right, thanks. I guess we've got other questions. A lot of them had to do with a specific, so I just like both Anita and Cade, both you recommended, give them a call. There's information on the handout because it's like we won't be able to, there's so many questions, we won't be able to get them all, but we'll do the best we can. This next slide I know, and I just had somebody ask, what does HIMSS mean? So maybe you can explain that as part of what we got here, special issuances and HIMSS.
So HIMSS is a human intervention motivation specialist. These are going to be senior AMEs that are specifically trained to handle drug and alcohol cases, certain psychological cases. We hear a lot of ADHD, substance abuse versus substance dependence. That's where your HIMSS comes into play. They're kind of the gatekeeper. They help you manage all your evaluations, and there's a lot of upkeep when somebody has these types of conditions. So that's what the HIMSS does. Briefly mention the stents, cardiac versus carotid. So if you've had stents placed in your carotid arteries, this is in your neck, that is not cardiac related. It is not disqualifying for BasicMed. If you've had stents placed somewhere in the coronary arteries, that is cardiac related, that is disqualifying. With the BasicMed disqualifying conditions, we have certain psychological conditions, there's certain neurological, and there's certain cardiac. And one of the biggest questions we have about the cardiac is what's the difference between electrical and mechanical? So when you look at the actual definition of coronary artery disease, you're talking about the actual blood vessels around the heart, where maybe, a blockage can cause a heart attack, you have to have bypass surgery, you have to have stents placed. That is a disqualifier. That's a no-go. You have to go back, go through the FAA approval process, and then you can go back to BasicMed. However, if it's electrical, pacemakers, defibrillators, arrhythmias, atrial fibrillation, those are not a BasicMed disqualifier. You can go to BasicMed with that. If you go through the FAA process, it's going to require special issuance. If you don't, you want BasicMed, by all means, you have every right to do so.
And for cardiac, it specifically mentions stents, and we put that there. Stents are kind of the catch-all because it's rare that you have coronary artery disease requiring treatment that doesn't get a stent, but it is possible. So something like a balloon angioplasty, where they don't necessarily put in a stent, or they do a bypass graft, commonly referred to as a cabbage coronary artery bypass graft. Even though that's not a stent, it is under the category of coronary artery disease requiring treatment. So that would also be disqualifying under BasicMed and require a special issuance. So just because you don't have a stent placed doesn't necessarily mean that you haven't had a disqualifying condition when it comes to the mechanical portion of the heart.
Cool, thanks you guys. And we're gonna move on to that next topic if you're all good. Other questions generally asking similar things, so we'll save some of those for the end. Don't forget, you can email medicalassist@aopa.org or call the 800 number that's there, although not right now because Anita's on the show here with us. And so give them, maybe space that out over the next couple of days just so they don't get completely overwhelmed by questions, but they are glad to answer those as part of your membership. All right, how about the FAA medical certificate? I did see some questions rolling through and people asking some basics. So Anita, tell us a little bit more about what they should know about this process.
Well, your first, second, and third class absolutely do require that you go through the FAA medical certification process. That process includes doing your MedExpress application, having an AME physical exam. Some things that you want to keep aware of, there are 15 disqualifying conditions for the FAA. If you have developed one of those 15 disqualifiers, while you may not initially be issued a medical certificate, there is always the possibility that you might be under a special issuance. Special issuances. So there are a couple categories of these. With a special issuance, this is given to an airman that has a medical condition that the FAA deems needs to be monitored. Special issuance is renewed every 12 months. It does prevent your medical certificate from downgrading in class. A special issuance is renewed at the FAA every year, so you want to make sure you're timing that accordingly. We also have now what is an AASI or an AME assisted special issuance. This is where the FAA is putting more control back in the hands of your AME. So you would bring your special issuance information every year to the AME, and the AME can actually reissue you a certificate in the office. So this is, if you have a special issuance, that's the one you want. The next category, the FAA now has 16 khakis. Khakis are a condition that an AME can issue. So typically these would have been a special issuance in the past. Now they are offering these worksheets. If the airman meets the criteria on that worksheet, they bring the information with them to the AME. AME writes them their certificate that day, they're good to go. And ideally, we want a regular issuance, right? Nobody wants to have to do yearly reports and so forth for their doctors that they have to bring to the AME. Again, that's, it's subjective to that person's health condition. The last category, we do have light sport. Light sport does not require you to have an FAA medical certificate. However, FAR 61.303B2 specifically states that if the airman has submitted an application for an FAA medical, they are not eligible for light sport until such time as they have been approved by the FAA. So some airmen are under the misconception that, while I'm waiting for the FAA decision, I can fly light sport. No, that is not the case. So make sure you're reading those regulations.
And that also means, for light sport, that also means that similar to BasicMed, you cannot have had a medical denied, suspended, revoked, or withdrawn also for light sport, similar to the same qualification for BasicMed.
Yeah, good point. I'm glad you pointed that out. As far as, one of the questions we get all the time is, how do I improve my odds of being issued? Be prepared. And Dr. Northrup, she's our federal air surgeon, she cannot emphasize this enough. She counts on organizations such as AOPA to help the airmen be prepared, that they have, they know what questions are on that MedExpress, and there are MedExpress simulators out there that you can utilize. Call us, we can tell you what documents you need. We can tell you whether or not you need to report a condition now, report it later. Does it require additional documentation? Be prepared. Consider your medical the same thing as you do your safety checks before you get in that aircraft. You got to be prepared and make sure you're covering all your bases.
Yeah, and I can't tell you how many times when I was back in Anita's position where, we'd hear from somebody after the fact, after they submit something to the FAA or after they talk to their AME, and they got themselves into a world of trouble that they may not have necessarily been in had they made a 10-minute phone call. So it's even if you think something is a benign condition and isn't going to be an issue, it's good due diligence just to pick up the phone and make a 10-minute phone call just to make sure that your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted.
Absolutely.
And I can tell you from my own experience too, I have the CPAP stuff, and when I was getting a medical, I used our service here, just talked to them, and they reviewed stuff for me, and boom, good to go. It was so easy to go, and I walked in, and I had more than I needed for the AME, and he issued it right in the office, no big deal. We did have a couple of questions that were kind of related. Maybe you can point them in the direction. We've got questions about what is under the 16 things that are in khaki. Is that listed somewhere on the website, or they can find those conditions that are allowed?
Absolutely. So at the end of the presentation, there is a web link there that goes to the FAA Guide for Aviation medical examiner's page, and on there you'll find those CACIs listed.
And that is on the handout too. I grabbed all of the ones that are on that slide. They are already on that handout, so please feel free to download that, and that way you'll have that access to that. And then one question, I think I even know the answer to this one. It says, if you have BasicMed, do you need to renew your FAA medical certificate? Of course, the answer is no. That's what I was going to say. Got one right.
Nope. Only if you want to maintain that FAA medical. Otherwise, and the same thing with the special issuance, you do not have to renew the special issuance unless you want to maintain that FAA medical certificate.
And let me ask just one more, because maybe you guys will know this reg without me trying to look it up while I'm monitoring. I talked to people that are still unclear about being able to use BasicMed as safety PIC. Can you reference, do anybody, you guys know the reg off the top of your heads where that says that you can be the safety pilot under BasicMed? No?
I don't.
Might be the safety pilot
but
reg.
while we're talking here, I'll reach out to the Pilot Information Center and I'll get that answer.
Awesome, thanks.
And I'll have it soon.
All right, cool. And then the last one, before we move on to that next part, somebody did ask the question on the previous slide. We didn't talk about aging pilots. They were wondering how age affects piloting.
So it is normal that as we age, we tend to have more health conditions. So the fact that the pilot is aging, it's just a natural evolution. It's not that they're being picked on because of their age. It is the fact that the older we get, the more health conditions we have. So yes, it can be more of a challenge to not only get a medical certificate, but if you are under BasicMed, if you're an aircraft owner, the first thing I tell you is check your insurance. Make sure your insurance company does not have different requirements for BasicMed. We are seeing that when we get to those golden years, that the insurances either are requiring them to do BasicMed on a yearly basis instead of once every 4 years, or they are saying simply, we're not going to cover you under BasicMed because it's not an FAA medical certificate.
Okay, cool. Thank you, guys. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. There are more questions about BasicMed. I'm trying to mark those so we can try to get those at the end. Because I said we got lots of questions, which is awesome. We'll just do the best we can. How about the medications? I know I've seen questions pop up about those. What should they know about that and where to find that list?
So unfortunately, the FAA does not put a medication database out there. For reasons of their own, we're not 100% sure, but they do not make it public. However, AOPA does maintain a medication database. The information that is on that database is fact-checked with the FAA, okay? So we are checking with them, as often as possible to make sure that those medications are still allowed. If there is a new medication coming to the market, I can guarantee you it's going to be at least 2 years before the FAA will allow it. So keep that in mind. They do not approve any experimental medications, trial, drug, I'm trying to think of what that word is. Like you do like drug trials, I'm sorry. They don't allow those. So the other thing is supplements. Supplements can be a tricky one because they are not regulated by the FDA. There's no way to guarantee that what is on the label is actually factual. Therefore, you're not sure what those ingredients actually are, and the FAA doesn't, they really don't like them. Vitamins, minerals, that's fine, but other supplements can be an issue. Weight loss medications, this is really a hot topic right now. One thing that the airmen need to be aware of is that, yes, they do allow weight loss medications. However, if your A1C level has ever hit 6.5 or higher, you are then put into a diabetic category. And once you're in the diabetic category, it requires a special issuance and you're forever there. Okay, so weight loss medications, pre-diabetic, they all fall into the same category. You need to be careful. 6.5 is that cutoff. Once you hit that, you are now a diabetic. Even if your doctor says you're not, per the FAA, you are, and you're going to end up with a special issuance.
Cool.
And really quick, Chris, PIC got back to me, which is another member benefit, so we use it too. It's a 6123 that talks about required crew member requirements for medical certifications, and then it's expanded upon in Advisory Circular 68-1A. So 6123 and then Advisory Circular 68-1A.
Okay, hopefully everybody got that one. That's for the one allowing you to be safety pilot using BasicMed. And I believe it probably lists the other things you can do as well, because somebody asked about instructing or doing their their CFI instructor, CFI II check ride. And yes, you can do that under BasicMed.
Yep.
That's
totally
all
in 6123.
Cool. All right. How about we had lots of questions already about cancer, so let's it's fortuitous that it's here. So tell us a little bit more about what they should be considering when it comes to cancer and medical certification.
So the biggest thing is cancer itself is not necessarily a disqualifying condition. It is the treatments that you receive for the cancer. If you have metastatic cancer, meaning that it has spread somewhere in the body, that could be disqualified initially until such time as you've actually gone into a remission state. But the treatments such as having chemotherapy, radiation therapy, that is going to be the disqualifier. So you cannot exercise privileges during that time. Once you have recovered, there is a clear path going back to becoming an airman. The FAA now offers CACIs for some of the most common types of cancers. We have breast cancer, colon cancer, prostate, bladder, renal cancer, and testicular cancer. With those, if you can show that you do not have a metastatic condition, that everything is under control, your AME can still issue you a certificate in the office. Skin cancers, that's another one. That's a biggie with pilots. We all know we're out in the sun all the time. As long as it doesn't involve any organs, then yes, you can still be issued. Melanomas, 90% of melanomas are going to be fine. You're going to hear things such as what is the depth of it, anything less than 0.75 millimeters in depth, that's when they actually carve it out. That is still going to be, you can still be certified. Same thing with the melanoma in C2. Again, if it has metastasized, if you are receiving radiation or chemotherapy, those are going to be your hard no's until such time as you have been in a remissive state. They do allow certain immunotherapies and hormone therapies. So those two categories do not fall into the chemotherapy realm of things. So some of those you can still use while in exercise privileges as a pilot in command.
Great. And then a couple of questions here just quickly, because I want to keep our pace up and make sure we get as many as we can. Somebody said, I have prostate cancer, can I still fly? I think you already did answer that question. It depends on the treatment. Mm-hmm. Somebody asked, what does CACI mean? So can you just...
Right, CACI is a condition an AME can issue. So that means you bring documentation to your AME at the time of your exam, and they can still issue you in the office.
Two other ones, and then we're going to move on. One is any progress, and I've heard this for both Canada and Mexico. Can you use BasicMed in Canada or Mexico? Do we know any updates on that?
Mexico, yes. Mexico, I believe going back to 2019, we extended it into Mexico. However, Canada is still a hard no. We've been working on it. We'll continue working on it, but it's a hard no.
And then the last one, I'm going to take two questions that were kind of related. It was, you need a valid US driver's license for BasicMed, therefore that would not work for a non-US resident. First question. Related question is, can somebody's living outside the country, outside the United States, and can they go to their local physician that may not be US licensed to get BasicMed? So kind of those two related ones, ID and physician.
Right, so BasicMed does state that it has to, the physician that does the BasicMed exam has to have a US state issued medical license. So it has to be a physician within the United States. Physicians such as an MD, DO are allowed. Another question we get a lot of, can a PA or a nurse practitioner do the BasicMed? They can certainly do the exams. They cannot sign off on it though. It has to have a state licensed physician sign off on it. Chiropractors, depending on the state, each state has different regulations. If they have a state medical license and they feel they can safely complete the BasicMed, then yes, they can. The other question about the ID. So I'm going to have to check on that because my understanding is as long as you have a U.S. a valid U.S. driver's license in a state and you have or a passport, but you have to have a U.S. mailing address. Like you have to be within the United States to utilize BasicMed.
Okay, cool. And I was just trying to answer questions as we were going too. So let's, I think we've got this one pretty well. Other questions were technical in nature, so that's no issue there. So let's talk about the cardiovascular. We had lots of questions about this, I know, popping up.
Oh yeah.
So,
So cardiovascular is not as cut and dry. This is something that if they have questions, I really highly recommend they actually call in and talk to us. We can tell you right out the gate that you have those cardiovascular disqualified conditions such as angina, MI is a heart attack, stents, bypass surgery, if you've had a heart or a valve replacement, pacemakers, coronary heart disease that was treated or is symptomatic. The FAA, once they have approved you, they will look at your documents. They will 9 times out of 10 issue you a special issuance unless the condition is severe enough that you don't qualify. Atrial fibrillation, a flutter, this is another common one. We always tell the airmen, be careful because you're going to have to be tested for sleep apnea. They always ask why. What does sleep apnea have to do with it? Well, believe it or not, sleep apnea is one of the leading causes of cardiac conditions and vice versa. So the two kind of go together. Hypertension. The FAA actually has a very high threshold for that, 155/95. If you get to your AME's office and you are hitting the top of that limit, ask them to redo your blood pressure towards the end of the visit. Because sometimes it's just that initial walking in, nerves, so forth. You can kind of bring it back down. Doesn't necessarily need that you need medication. Sometimes you've had too much caffeine. There's a number of different things. But if you are on medications, if it does traditionally run on the high side, again, that's a CACI condition that an AME can issue as long as you have appropriate documentation. In some of the questions, I did see a question about aortic aneurysms. These aneurysms are in the chest abdominal area. They do require FAA approval. Okay, so depending on to what extent, if that aneurysm is hitting a 4.5 centimeters, that's where the FAA starts getting concerned. If you are above that 4.5 or you're hitting a 5.0 centimeters, then the FAA is going to say no. We're not going to issue until you actually get that taken care of. It needs to be repaired.
Yeah, and there, this is not. Anita kind of mentioned this at the beginning. The cardiovascular is pretty complicated when it comes to FAA approval. So this is, this 4-bullet list is by all means not a comprehensive list. For instance, there are significantly more rhythm disorders. It's just AFib and a flutter. So it's really important, along with everything we've been talking about, that when it comes to these very specific conditions, to not go out this alone, to give us a call, because there's a lot more that goes into cardiovascular diseases than just what's on this list. So because you have something that may or may not be on this list doesn't mean that you're in the clear. It can be complicated even though we don't mention it. So that's one of the times when it's important to give us a call.
2 questions about CACI that popped up here, so I'll just knock those out really quick, and I want to keep us moving. Obviously, we know it's conditions that an AME can issue, but can your own personal physical issue as well? I'm just trying to get this down, or does it have to be an AME? So I think what they meant is physician. So when it comes to BasicMed, we're not talking about CACI, right? That's a different story with your personal physician versus the AME.
Right. So let me clarify that. A CACI, a special issuance, an AME assisted special issuance, those are only specific to an FAA medical certificate. That's your first, second, and third class. BasicMed does not have any special issuances. They do not have any CACIs. So you don't have to worry about that with the BasicMed. It goes back to you having an open, honest conversation with your physician that signs off on the BasicMed for you. So you don't necessarily need extra documents unless that doctor asks for them, but it's not required by the FAA as far as BasicMed goes.
And then the other related one to that is a CACI a special type of AME, or can any AME issue under CACI? I believe it's probably any AME.
It's any AME, yes.
Cool.
And really quick, I'm just going to circle back to the BasicMed question that I just got clarification from the Pilot Information Center on. For BasicMed, you must hold a valid U.S. driver's license. So it's not just U.S. ID, it's not just U.S. passport, it's U.S. driver's license to hold BasicMed.
Because it's kind of using that medical part of that they assess when you take your driver's exam. Real quick, when we're moving on, because there's a lot of questions that I'm trying to keep track. 5 centimeters aneurysm or 5 millimeters?
I'm sorry, millimeters. I stand corrected. It's millimeters.
Centimeters would be pretty big, yeah.
That would be pretty big.
Let's go to the next one. All right, let's keep going. Hearing. What do we know about hearing? This was, I think this was about the exam, I believe, or this person I know was worried about flying. They use a jet and they didn't want to have to put hearing aids in. Right.
So as long as you meet the hearing standards with or without a hearing aid, and these are your standards, you know, average voice, conversational voice at 6 feet behind you, using both ears. If you are in the aircraft and you are using a headset, at that time, if you can hear better without the hearing amplification, then you take it out. Just utilize your headset. But if you're not using that, then obviously you have to have it in. So it's more simple than what they're thinking that it is.
Okay, cool. All right, and then is there anything else we want to hit there? AME can administer that. You think you covered everything there? Any of the bullet points you wanted to discuss?
So it's just if you don't hear that average conversation at 6 feet behind you, the AME may administer this audiometric testing to see if you can qualify that way. If you're not able to qualify, then what ends up happening is you get a denial, and then you can request a medical flight test. And if you can demonstrate in that medical flight test that you can adequately hear, then they will likely issue you a letter of evidence. Now, this is not the same thing as a SOTA, which is a statement of demonstrated ability. Easy way to tell the difference, SOTA is something that for a static condition is not going to change. And for instance, you've had an amputation, where a letter of evidence, similar to a special issuance where they may say every 2 years or every 4 years, we would want you to go and have new hearing testing done. So,
cool.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And then one related, and we're moving on again because we want to keep our pace going. But this person asked, and this is a general question I'm going to sort of put it into. If the AME, this person was going for a medical application, the AME would not issue the 3rd class at the exam. Is that a denial? And you're prevented from BasicMed if they won't issue? Because I think he didn't hear the word denied.
Most often it is a deferral. So AMEs do have the right to issue a denial, but the FAA strongly discourages them from doing a denial. They'd rather they deferred them and that the denial came from the FAA. So if your AME does not issue, clarify with them, but most likely it is a deferral. And as long as you still meet the BasicMed requirements, you don't have a disqualifying condition, then yes, you can still go to BasicMed.
Cool. All right, let's keep going.
With that really quick though, with that deferral, that doesn't mean you're scot-free and you can then operate on BasicMed. Eventually, if you do nothing, that deferral will turn into a denial. The FAA will send you a denial. So you have to satisfy whatever the requirements were to then be issued your medical. Otherwise, you will be denied.
Correct. Yeah.
Good point. Thanks, Cade. Yeah, that's really important. How about our vision part here? We haven't had many questions. We had obviously the ones that were put in ahead of time on cataracts and glaucoma. So can you give us the rundown there?
So with any sort of eye surgeries, implanted lenses, essentially once you've had let me first start by saying most lenses are approved. If it's something new on the market, again, it kind of goes back to, has it been FDA approved? Has the FAA had 2 years to review it and authorize its use? If there's something of new lens out there and you're not sure, contact us. We can ask the FAA. We can contact them, say, hey, what are your thoughts on these lenses, before you actually go through the procedure. Once you have had the procedure done and you meet the visual standards for the class in which you have applied, at that point, under 6153, yes, you can resume exercising privileges. However, the caveat to that is that you have to wait a 3-month recovery period before you supply an updated eye evaluation form to the FAA. So if you're due to renew your medical, you're going to run that risk of, if you haven't met that 3-month window, your AME may have to defer you, where if you can wait to that 3-month recovery period, bring that new eye evaluation to the AME, they may still be able to issue you. Okay, glaucoma. For most cases of glaucoma, it can fall underneath the CACI. There's a worksheet that needs to be completed with your physician. So your eye specialist fills it out, you bring it to your AME. There are some key guidelines on that CACI worksheet. So essentially they're looking for eye pressures, intraocular pressures that are remaining at 23 or less, and they don't want more than a 5-degree difference between the two eyes. So you can't have one at 23 and one at 16. That's not going to work. If you're hitting above the 23, the 24, 25, that may fall into a special issuance category. Anything higher than that is going to automatically be disqualifying.
Cool. All right. No questions necessarily here. What I'm going to do is I'm just trying to watch our time. I haven't seen questions on this next topic, so we're going to jump over this. Please understand, on the website, we've got a huge guide to all of these things. There is a link on the handout to get to these. So we're going to do, again, the best that we can to cover, because there's just so many questions. Let's go to the mental health, because I've seen lots of questions from folks in the audience asking about this as well.
All right, FEA has come a long way with the mental health category, and they are constantly working on it, trying to make improvements. As recently as last year, they have added in some more medications that are now allowed. So these medications, I do want to point out, it's on a case-by-case basis. They only allow one medication at a time. Of course, these include traditional Prozac, sertraline, Zoloft, Celexa, and Lexapro. They've added in the Wellbutrin, only the XL and the SR, the Prestige, Cymbalta, and Fetzer. So they are opening up those categories. Depending on how long you are on the medication for, and this is a common misconception on the FEA website, it has a chart, a flow chart, and on there it actually talks about applying for a regular issuance after being off the medication for 6 months. Do not stop these medications if you think you're going to bypass having to do a HIMSS evaluation. That's not the case. That is not what that diagram is showing you. Essentially, if you've been on a medication, any sort of mental health medication for more than 6 months, you will inevitably have to do a HIMSS evaluation. Okay. The difference is, if you're still on the medication, you get placed into a special issuance. If you're not on the medication, you may not have to have a special issuance, but you still have to have that evaluation. And of course, talk therapy, strongly encouraged. The FEA has no problem with that. And honestly, they don't have a problem with the medications either. It's just that there's a longer process to get back in the air when you're on these medications. They would rather you stayed on them if you're better on them. They don't come off of them just solely so you think you can get your certificate faster. That's not the way to do this. ADD, ADHD, this is a hot topic. Our up-and-coming pilots, we talk about this every day. There are absolutely no medications that are allowed to treat these conditions. We're finding that a fair amount of airmen have actually been misdiagnosed with these conditions, and there is now a fast track and a standard track to help the airmen kind of bypass some of that, to help get them in the air faster.
All right, cool. And again, no questions for live on this one right now, but I know other ones had been, but let's keep moving on. We've got about 12 minutes left in our normal time. So let's just hit the big ones that I'm seeing in the audience. Substance abuse was one that popped up a few times. So tell us a little bit about that process.
Okay, so we get a lot of questions about this area. So the MedExpress application, it says, have you ever in your lifetime had a diagnosis of substance abuse or dependence, alcohol abuse or dependence? So you need to look at your medical records. This goes back to being prepared, looking for this information ahead of time, because if it's in there, keep in mind, most medical records are now online. They're easily accessible. When you go to your AME, a lot of times you're signing a release form that allows them to look at these national databases that contain our medical records, so it's out there. Can you still be issued? If you have a diagnosis of dependence, it's going to be hard pressed. I'll be honest with you, it's going to be very hard pressed. It's going to be a long process. It can be done, but it might be several years before you get your medical certificate. If you're looking at a case where you have an abuse situation, as long as it's treated, as long as you can show abstinence and that you're doing well, it is a possibility to be reissued. You can anticipate being in that HIMSS program that we spoke about earlier. History of arrests, convictions, administrative actions against your driver's license. So we will often get a question saying, well, I was arrested, but then I had it expunged. Well, the question comes down to, you were arrested. It is an actual arrest. And the application is asking you, did you have an arrest? They're not asking you if it was expunged. They're saying, have you had an arrest? Have you had a conviction? Have you lost your driver's license? So that administrative action says your driver's license has been suspended for a period of time. Obviously, if you don't have a valid driver's license, you're not supposed to be exercising privileges as a pilot either. Whenever these questions come up, we always recommend that the airman talk to an attorney. There's more to it than just the medical side of things. There's a securities division. They actually handle the pilot certificate, not the medical certificate portion of this. So if you've had an actual conviction or administrative action, you must report it to them. We'll hear airmen call and they'll say, well, I don't even have a medical certificate anymore. Doesn't matter, we're not talking about the medical certificate. Securities division is your pilot license, pilot certificate. It has to be reported. And that just covered those last two.
All right, great. And let's see, I don't think I saw anything there. We've got just about 10 minutes left to see if we can get these other two topics done. These are the big ones that I've seen. Neurological, I've seen a number of questions, whether it was from, I saw global amnesia as one of the questions specifically, and some other things like this. So maybe hit this neurological topic.
Okay, migraines now fall under khakis. So if you have the right documentation, depending on the treatment, the frequency of the migraines, your AME may still be able to issue you in the office. Strokes get a little bit tricky because strokes may have been something that's spontaneous. It may have been something that was cardiac related. So for instance, if we're talking about something that was cardiac related, a blood clot that traveled to the brain, for instance, not only do you have to be cleared neurologically, but you also have to be cleared on the cardiovascular side. So those you're looking at anywhere from a 1 to 2 year recovery, in addition to anything else that, any other health conditions you may have also encountered. Brain bleeds, same concept, depending on what the cause of it. If it was, we know what it was, and it was spontaneous, it wasn't due to any sort of head injury, you may be in the cockpit much faster. Mild head injuries such as concussions, as long as you're cleared, you haven't had any brain bleeds, everything's cleared up, your AME can still issue. More serious brain injuries, so we start talking about fractures to the skull, loss of consciousness for an extended period of time, bleeding either under the skull, within the brain tissue, all of those play a factor into that. So that's anywhere from a 6 months to a 5 months or 5 year recovery. That's, again, this is something that we recommend you call us because we'll help you figure out where in those categories you are. Seizures, it is possibly up to a 10-year recovery period. It depends on the situation. So for instance, if you had childhood seizures under the age of 5, your AME can still issue. If you had a single provoked seizure, you may be back in the air as soon as 1 to 2 years. If it was multiple seizures, you were on medications, not only do you have to be seizure free for a period of 2 years, you have to be off medications, anti-seizure medications, anywhere from a 2 to 3 year window. So again, it depends on the situation.
Okay, and then one follow-up, there was aphasia too. He says, besides amnesia, I'm worried about aphasia. I assume that's related here.
Yeah, so with aphasia, it's neurological, obviously, but to what extent do you have the aphasia? I mean, is it to the point where we're talking speech, the ability to swallow? It depends on the severity. It really, yeah.
That would probably be a call then, maybe call in and find out.
That's definitely a call in, yeah. And when we're looking at neurologicals, they do a lot of, not only do you have to have a neurological evaluation, but they also do neurocognitive screening. So you'll hear the COG screen AE. I'll be honest with you, those COG screens, they're tough. They are tough. These COG screens were created for young aviators, 30, 40 years ago. The FAA is working on coming up with better ones, to better meet our standards today. But natural aging progression is the older we get, we lose those cognitive abilities. So it becomes harder and harder to get through these.
Okay. All right. One more topic that we'll do in the official part here, and then we're going to go to our Q&A section, which is sleep disorders, because I saw a whole bunch of questions in there about that as well when it came to different types of sleep disorders.
Yeah. So sleep apnea is one of the most common. And again, it can correlate with cardiac conditions as well. The great thing about sleep apnea is, yes, it requires a special issuance, but if you have the proper documentation, and after 30 days of treatment, you can provide that documentation and go back to flying and then later get your special issuance. So it's not necessarily a situation where you can't be issued right away. Okay, and honestly, people do so much better with their memory, sleep schedules, eating schedules, cognitive abilities. All that is so much better when they are actually treating their sleep apnea.
Cool, and it's all right there. The big thing too, I know what I'm going to do is jump to that slide with the links on it for right now, and then we'll go back and hit the Q&A. But please, you got the 800 number there, 800 USA AOPA, and then medical assist at aopa.org. Tons of questions. We're going to get to the Q&A here in just a moment. Let me just jump ahead here really quick. Let's see if I click on that guy, and then I go right to there. So the web links that I know that Anita, you were so kind to put together, and some more. I added some more to the handout as well. These are all on that handout. So check for that and download that. And then you've got the number, and I put the number on the handout too, that and the email address, so that you can reach out to AOPA as a benefit of your AOPA membership. So real quick, what we're gonna do is we're gonna wrap up the webinar officially, but luckily Anita and Cade are gonna stick around and answer questions for a little bit here, and we'll go back through, and I've been marking them off and trying to save them. But if you are not yet an AOPA member, we really think that you should be. We would love to have you part of our community. As you know, AOPA is the world's largest aviation community, of course, working to protect everybody's freedom to fly. So it'll help you stay informed. We've got lots of great resources, including calling the Pilot Information Center and the medical team. And so great rates on other aviation products and services, et cetera. Check it out, aopa.org/membership. Next month, we are really excited. We're gonna have our own AOPA employee, Jamie Beckett, will be on. He's from down in Florida. It's called It's a Water World. Why not get your seaplane rating? The whole idea being that the world is covered by something like 71% by water. So a seaplane rating might be pretty useful for you. So check that out. So I hope you'll join us for that. That's May 15th, 2025. I see lots of questions coming in. Oh yeah, thank you. Right now, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna officially say, because I did forget one more time, let's give away 2 hats. So go right now with the hats. And I'll tell you what, Drew, we're going to go ahead and give you a hat too, just because you reminded me, because I forgot. So Drew's going to get one, and plus we'll do 2 others. I know we've got just those left. So the first 2 people to come in are also going to get a hat. And so let's go back, and I'm going to start now. Of course, the thing's going to go crazy on me now, so I won't be able to get to my questions. There they go. Okay, we've got enough. We're all good. We've got the 2 people in. So go ahead and pause sending them in. And Stephen, do you want to tell us who won the hats if you're able?
So I'm still collating data, but I've contacted Paige Griffey and Thomas Cascaden already. We know Drew, and then I'll be picking the first 2 from this recent announcement.
Okay, cool. So maybe we can announce those in a little bit.
Yeah,
all
and
right.
I'll be emailing all of you individually to get the best mailing addresses for you.
Perfect. All right, let me go back to the top, and let's hit up Cade and Anita with some questions from the audience, from the live audience here. Says, I can't locate my previous CMEC, which we know is that's the thing for BasicMed, the medical form. Is it better to request a copy from the FAA? In addition, it looks like every 2 years for the online course, but every 4 years for CMEC completion. I'm not sure what that's all about, but go ahead. Can you tell us the answer to that one?
So, yeah, the CMEC, or the Comprehensive Medical Exam Checklist, which is what the physician fills out for BasicMed, more than likely, 99% of the time, I would say, you are the only one with a copy of that. The doctor may or may not have made a copy of. There's no obligation for the doctor to make a copy of that and to hold it themselves. And the FAA certainly does not get a copy of it, which is actually kind of a good thing. So you are it. If you don't have it, then it likely doesn't exist anymore, in which case you are not legal to fly on BasicMed and you have to go get a new one. It doesn't mean you have to retake the course, but it does mean that you would need to go do another physical with a physician and have a filled out comprehensive medical exam checklist. It is a two-part deal with BasicMed. The CMEC and the course both have to be valid. So if you lost it, you're not valid.
Okay, we've got that link on the handout for the BasicMed information and the AOPA's course, so go check that out. Here's the next one. I wear an insulin pump going on 4 years. I've got excellent control. I also have been using a CPAP machine for 6+ years with great results. I've never been turned down for a class 2 or class 3 medical, but I haven't had an aviation medical since the late 1970s. Is it likely that I'm going to either get either of those medicals or even a general medical certificate?
Well, that one is tricky. So my question would be, is they're a type 1 or type 2 diabetic? Most likely they're a type 1 diabetic. There is a very rigorous outline on the FAA website that gives you a path going forward. Can you be issued? Absolutely. With or without the CPAP, yes, you can. I can tell you it's going to be a process though. I mean, you're looking at probably well over a year to a year and a half before you actually get issued that medical certificate. So call our office because there's obviously something else going on here. There's more details before I can give you a definitive answer.
And I'm going to go just back up to that slide so they can see the number and email, which is on the handout as well.
Yes.
I'm going to do the best I can. We have a lot of questions, so I'm just going to pick out the ones I marked as red first. How does the FAA medical view pacemakers without defibrillators, if I can pronounce that correctly?
So the FAA actually does not, well, let me correct myself here. Up until recently, they would not issue a medical certificate to an airman that had a pacemaker and a defibrillator that was active. So recently, they finally allowed the first active defibrillator to actually be issued. So if it's just a plain pacemaker, there's not going to be an issue. But if you have that defibrillator, it's not going to be. I mean, you're likely going to be denied. So give us a call and we can talk about the options.
Here is one that I saw several times. So I'm going to hopefully knock out a few here, but this person's had their medical in with the FAA for 8 months now,
Yes.
wondering about the process. And there's multiple questions along those lines of how do I find out about the status, et cetera.
Okay, so the airman can always look at their MedExpress application and see if there's any updates offered there, and actually highly recommend that they do to make sure that documents that they have sent to the FAA are actually going to be scanned in to that MedExpress, so they should be able to see them to make sure that they're there. As far as the turnaround time, we're finding that those applications that went in like early last year to mid last year, those ones are now starting to come through. Those are clearly taking 8, 9, 10 months before they're issued. However, we are seeing a little bit of movement as far as newer applications coming through where the turnaround times are starting to decrease. The last notification we had with the FAA was that, so just to give perspective, last year they had more than 450,000 applications come through medical certification.
Wow.
Yeah, it's astounding. They finally were given the budget to hire additional physicians. Those physicians are now on staff. They're now, trained. They have been hitting hard on that backlog, getting rid of those numbers. From being in the thousands for each doctor to review, we're now down in the hundreds. So they're making progress. And I know it's hard on the airmen, but it's getting better. It really is. But AOPA does offer a service where we can do inquiries with the FAA to kind of keep them, on track to say, hey, what's going on? Give us updates. If they happen to have a letter or certificate ready, most often we can get that to the airman faster than waiting for it to arrive in the mail. And then, of course, if the FAA is asking for more information, then obviously we can say, okay, this is what you need. Quick, get it into them. And as soon as they send it, we'll start pinging the FAA again, saying, okay, it's there. Somebody look at it. So
cool. See, another benefit of AOPA membership. Yep. I love it. All right. So suggested question, what is a special issuance and why are they applied? You kind of talked about this, so maybe just we may have already answered it, but I was surprised when I received a special issuance after DVT, which I assume is deep vein thrombosis, and the FAA communications, while I'm sure made sense to their experts, were somewhat confusing to me.
So special issuances, those are issued for medical conditions that traditionally would have been denied. And the FAA is now saying, okay, we're going to let up a little bit. We're going to let you have that medical certificate. However, we want to monitor it. So every 12 months, you have to submit updated information. What we find, especially something like a DVT, those types of conditions, your special issuance is granted for a period of 5 years. After maybe 2 or 3 years of showing them stability and there hasn't been new reoccurrences, the airman may have the ability to ask the FAA to discontinue that special issuance. The worst they're going to do is say no. Then at the end of that 5-year window, that special issuance expires, the FAA re-reviews whether or not to continue the special issuance or to cancel it altogether. So it doesn't necessarily have to be forever.
Got it. There's another person saying, what about the chances of getting a third-class medical if they have vertigo, diagnosed with vertigo?
Not while you have vertigo, but if you can show that it has resolved, most likely you can be issued.
Okay, and I'm just answering one really quick right here because somebody asked about, and it was about the details about chemo and radiation treatments are going through, and I'm answering back to them. That's probably sounds like they should be calling us about because it's so specific. Yeah. Okay, let me just finish that, and I'm going to get to that next question. Here we go. I'm going to send that one out to Graham. All right, let's keep going down here. Oh, there's the hat stuff. Let me try to get past that. All right, let's go back up here. And the question was, oh, you've already answered that one. Skip down past that. Here we go. Here's another one. Go ahead.
Kidney stones.
Go for it.
I did see a couple of them with kidney stones. So there's this misconception that if an airman has kidney stones that they cannot exercise privileges. That's not entirely true. They now have khakis where even if you have a retained stone, as long as it's stationary and it's not in a spot that's going to cause you, to be incapacitated, you may be able to be reissued a medical certificate. So, obviously, if you're in the throes of passing a kidney stone, you're not going to fly, but it is still possible to get a medical certificate and be issued by an AME with kidney stones.
Cool. Here's one that I know that we've talked a little bit about. Go ahead, Cade.
Oh, I was just going to say, Anita, circling back to the vertigo question, it's pretty common to get calls about BPPV. Can you kind of touch on that a little bit? I think that comes up quite a bit.
Right. So with the BPPV, that's a tongue twister there. It's, again, if you can show that it's treated, that it's resolved, and you no longer have it, then it's something that can still be issued. But that's the key there. I mean, obviously, 6153. If you're dizzy, if you have vertigo, if you stand up too fast and all of a sudden you get dizzy, obviously there's something going on. You shouldn't be flying, right?
But you feel like you're flying.
Yeah.
So this one says, my student flight physical was denied by the flight surgeon because they said I had a history of psychosis. What does that mean? And then they said in March of 2003, I suffered traumatic brain injury. It was hit head on by a drunk driver doing 80 on the 7 Mile Bridge in the Florida Keys when I was riding my Harley Davidson and I wasn't wearing a motorcycle helmet. Since then, I've been able to live my life normally and still drive my truck and do everything myself. I'm a licensed aircraft mechanic and I still work on aircraft. I'd love to fly private pilot and want to return to it. So that psychosis part there.
That's a tough one. So psychosis is a disqualifying condition for the FAA. If you can show that it was a misdiagnosis, if you can show that it's resolved, it hasn't happened, the FAA may consider it. This is one of those mental health conditions that kind of like the ADHD, sometimes it's the diagnosis just really, it's not solid until the FAA, their doctors kind of look at it from an aeromedical perspective. So if that could be cleared up, they may be issued. The traumatic brain injury, that's another one. When you're adding to the severity, a lot of people say, well, I feel fine. I don't understand what the problem is. Well, to them, they feel fine, but they may not necessarily see or feel what the others may see. So for instance, if you have a condition that's slowly progressing, you may not know it's progressing, but everybody else can see it. So it's kind of one of those. I mean, can you be cleared after TBI to go back to flying? You can, but with that double diagnosis of the psychosis part, I'll be honest with you, it doesn't look very promising.
Yeah, and Dr. Northrup is really good about saying to, she wants to say yes. So, her famous thing is like, help me get to say yes. Help me get to a point where I can tell the airman yes. The sad reality is that in some cases, simply can't say yes. And these more difficult cases do go to the federal air surgeon for review. And she's a pilot. She wants people to fly, but there are instances which it's just the nature of the conditions. She can't get to yes, and that's just the unfortunate reality of the world.
But on the good side is he can fly with friends. He just can't be pilot in command. So nothing says you can't still fly. You just cannot be that pilot in command.
Gotcha. Hey, a couple of basic med I want to roll in here from back towards the beginning. Age restrictions on basic med, and then this is the one I know the answer to this one. So it's, can a student pilot who's never had a regular FAA medical go straight to basic med to be certified? So the age restriction, and/or can you just jump right to basic med?
So there are no age restrictions for basic med. There's no 100 years old, you can get basic med as long as you beat all the other qualifications. And in order to get basic med, you have to have held a FAA medical certificate since July 15th of 2006. So if you're a brand new student pilot and you've never held a medical, you cannot get basic med. That requirement is it's there for a reason, and there's no bypassing it.
Okay. And then here's another one related to that. What process steps does the FAA take when a pilot, for basic med, what process steps are there for the FAA when a pilot has an NDR match, which is National Driver Registry, I assume?
So that one gets a little more complicated.
They reported it too, per 61. Yeah, they reported it, yeah.
That's a little more complicated. There's more to it. I don't know that I can give a definitive answer through here.
Okay.
I'd say they'd have to call in. Because then it gets back to the question, do they still have a valid FAA medical? Did they falsify that FAA medical? That one's very complicated.
That we get into reporting under 6115 at that point, which is the reporting requirements for if you've had, the arrest reporting requirements. And that does, all that's going to hit on an NDR. That's a question that if you call AOPA and you have our pilot protection services, you can speak to one of our attorneys about that. But that gets a little bit in detail.
Okay. Here's one. I've got a basic med and a third class medical that expires in September. I was diagnosed with Parkinson's last year. Is it risky for me to try to renew that third class? I just have a slight tremor in my non-dominant hand.
It depends on the severity of the Parkinson's and the medication, if they're using medication to treat it. So that's another one I would say definitely call in, and we can give you more guidance on that part.
Okay. I'm just scrolling down. Here's one. I saw a couple of these. Maybe we can knock these out. Folks having a hard time getting an AME. Actually, the AME won't issue basic med because of the AASI, which I assume is special issuance. Is that what that is?
Right.
So that won't issue. And then I saw other people asking about finding a doctor that will do a basic med.
Yeah, so this is a tricky one. So the AMEs, some of them, yes, they will do basic med. However, the question that I run into is, at what point does the AME take off their FAA hat and look at just the airman and say, yeah, okay, you qualify for basic med? And some AMEs are great about that. They'll say, yeah, you should be doing basic med, don't do the special issuance. And other AMEs say, no, I'm not doing that. There is a misconception saying that, if you have a special issuance or you have that AASI that you can't go to basic med. That is not true. I cannot stress that enough. It is not true. What I do caution is if you are in that HIMSS program, that's where you might get yourself into some trouble. So that's something you should call us on. As far as finding a basic med doctor, it is tough. I'll be honest with you. So we do have a doctor finder on the AOPA website, and the doctors that are on there have specifically added their name to that list. We don't go out and solicit doctors to add their name to the list. We're not allowed to do that, although we would love to. That's just was one of those things about basic med. If you have a doctor that is happy to do basic med, by all means, encourage them to put their names on there. Make it easier for your fellow pilots out there. And again, you know, if your doctor has questions about BasicMed or even your AME, we get a lot of phone calls from AMEs asking questions, even about FAA stuff, about BasicMed. We're happy to answer those questions. You know, if your doctor says, I don't know what BasicMed is all about, call us. We are more than happy to explain that to you.
Cool. I've previously been issued a third-class medical with special issuance for medication-controlled diabetes, non-insulin. Can you, in future years, self-certify under BasicMed rather than seeking a third class again?
Absolutely. They can do it today.
Cool. All right, let me keep scrolling down, get to the red ones. There we go. We already answered that one, so I'm not worried about that. Was the one about the doctor living outside the U.S. Here's what interesting one. And, this person, I'm not going to worry about. They've already left. It was actually, it's kind of interesting. Would a third class special issuance be considered a negative on a second class application? And I would say the answer to that's no. It shouldn't make any difference.
But they'd have to reapply for that special issuance.
Right.
The special issuance is only valid for the class in which it was applied for. So they would have to reapply for it.
Okay, we did this one already, which is good. Let's see. Okay, is it not so that according to the new requirement, FAR Part 3, Subpart C, even when you live outside the U.S., it is a must to have a U.S. postal address? I'm not sure if you guys can answer. That might be a PIC question.
That is a great question to utilize your AOPA benefits and contact the pilot information. Talk to one of our aviation technical specialists.
Yeah, that's a great number. The number is the 1-800-USA AOPA. So I would reach out to that one.
Let me add to that. AOPA is now offering a service where we can provide them with a U.S. mailing address.
That's right. The registered agent thing, right?
Yes, registered agent. So that's definitely something. Call in and we could probably help you out.
Cool. ADD, lifetime or age out? It was the only question. I'm not sure if you can interpret that one.
So a lot of people that have a diagnosis of ADD or ADHD will outgrow it by the time they're in their late teens, early 20s. Not everybody will, but most of them, a fair amount of them will outgrow it. I assume that's probably what they're asking.
Okay. Are there flying under light sport, are there any disqualifying medical conditions that require reporting to the FAA?
Light sport? Yeah, go ahead, Cade.
No, however, 6153 still applies. So even if you develop one of the conditions that would otherwise be disqualifying, doesn't mean that you can't fly under light sport. However, you have to be able to self-certify that you're medically fit to step into the cockpit, which we all do every time we fly, whether you realize you're doing it or not. But so that will always still apply.
Here's an interesting one. There's a general question this person put out. It says, do previously reported health issues for class 1 through 3 exams need to be rehashed for BasicMed? In other words, should you ignore it, note it having been previously reported, redocument the said issue? Kind of that idea of that's and I saw another one about that history too. Like, how far do you have to go back?
It's your entire history. And yes, you do need to disclose it on the BasicMed exam. That goes back to what I was saying about having an open and honest conversation with the doctor that signs you off on BasicMed. Remember, the doctor, you're not going to be disqualified for BasicMed by the doctor that signs off. That's not the way this works. The doctor says, I'm not comfortable signing off on it. That's fine. It doesn't get reported to the FAA. And the airman can leave. And if they wanted to, they can even go find another doctor. I'm not saying doctor shop, but you know, they have the right to do that. But that's the point of BasicMed, is that your doctor knows you best. And that's the whole point, is that you have an open and honest conversation with them.
Cool. Is a U.S. driver's license required for FAA medical? I understand it's required for BasicMed. I guess the answer to that one's no, but because if you get a regular medical, that's kind of covering that part they would need the driver's license for under light sport, but I'm not sure.
Well, they need the driver's license or a U.S. issued like a government ID, like a passport, something along those lines. Yeah.
Yeah. So at least an ID.
I think there's also, it gets into like, if you hold a medical, an EASA medical, that, that privileges kind of transfer a little bit. That's another question for calling the Pilot Information Center. But there are some caveats to that with foreign pilots operating in the United States. But that's a good question for one of our aviation technical specialists.
Here's one that I saw. I remember marking this off earlier. Osteomyelitis, I believe is the term. is on the FAA's checklist in case this meaning the post-infection inflammation? How high is the risk of denial? How long does it take the FAA to make a decision?
If you can show evidence that it is resolved and it's not something that's causing you to be incapacitated, and depending on like treatment, it may be something an AME can issue.
Cool. All right. I think the one thing we didn't, somebody did mention torn ligaments such as rotator cuff, knee meniscus. We didn't get to do the bone and joint one, so maybe we can talk just briefly about that.
It's same thing. Once you have fully recovered and you don't have any sort of physical limitations, you're not on any pain medications, 6153, it's up to you when you want to go back to flying, and then you report it the next time you renew your medical.
Yeah, and there's no FAA clearance process with that to go back to flying. A lot of people think that they need to go back and see their AME before the AME can kind of bless them to go fly. That's not the case. I had a shoulder surgery, and as soon as I was, functionally able to perform duties of pilot in command, I could go back and fly. And so there's, people think that they need to go schedule an appointment with an AME after a surgery or after they break an arm or something like that. And you don't have to. It's just everything goes back to FAR 6153 and your medical ability to operate as pilot in command.
Cool. And then the last one here, I just saw, because now we're into the ones that folks were asking after I'd gone back. Have you guys heard anything in terms of, and I know you said they just got to hire the new doctors, has any of the we'll call it staffing changes that are going on and all the stuff happening in DC and across the federal government, is that affecting the medical folks at the FAA?
So it did initially. It took Dr. Northrup, the federal air surgeon, took her a long time to finally get approval to hire doctors. And this happened like mid to late last year. And just as everybody started getting on board, January rolled around, and yes, they did have some layoffs. They did have some people let go. But as soon as they were let go, they were brought back because they realized, no, this is one department. We need those bodies. So those people, it has not affected them, put it that way. They're actually better now than they were before.
Cool. All right. I think we have covered all the gist. Obviously, everybody, if you've got specific questions or more, check out the handout. We've got all the great links on there. Give AOPA a call at the 1-800 number. There's also that email, and that is on the handout as well. And it was on lots of the slides previously. Please don't forget, we have our next episode, May 15th, 2025. We're going to be talking about seaplanes, so it's a water world. And I just want to take Cade and Anita, thank you guys so much for being on with us. I know we've gotten lots of thank yous on here, so I really appreciate your time and helping us out. And hopefully they'll meter out. Maybe not everybody call today. Call over the next week or so just to meter it out.
Space it out. Send us emails. Yeah.
There was one more thing I wanted to touch on really quick, and I actually saw this on a forum, on an online forum a few days ago that I just happened to stumble across. And somebody asked if when you call the AOPA medical certification specialist, if that's confidential or if it gets back to the FAA. And it is 100% confidential. It does not get back to the FAA. So no matter what the issue is, I can't stress enough to call the Pilot Information Center and talk to our medical certification specialist teams. You're not losing anything. You only stand to gain by doing so.
Cool. Good call, Cade. Thanks a lot. All right, everybody. We're going to call it. Steven, if you would, let's go ahead and close it, and we'll see you all next month. Looking forward to it, and make sure you guys fly safe.
Bye.